It was completely unexpected. I have generally been good with emotional boundaries, having been in non-monogamous relationships for years. I knew how to keep people as close or as distant as I needed to. It was part of what made me a good sex worker, or so I thought. I remembered the session. He had sent me a long email detailing this crazy scene that had really weirded me out, and I was nervous about it, particularly as a pro-dom. I tended to make it clear that I would do as much or as little as I wanted, but I still wanted to satisfy some of the client's needs. This one wanted me to spit in his face, to restrain him in a variety of intense ways as I humiliated him, things I didn't tend to do with my lovers at home. I worried we wouldn't click well during the session, but I was determined to try. I walked into the dungeon, and he was so attractive I couldn't believe it. Only a few years older than me, hot and submissive. It seemed like a dream. I gathered myself together, determined to offer dominant experience that would be sexy for us both, and then just walk away. I tied him up and called him all manner of humiliating things, and found myself turned on by how he reacted, by the way he writhed for me. I found myself relaxed, comfortable, enjoying myself even more than usual. When he left, I stopped myself from asking him out for a drink, and I took the train back home, confused, but figuring I wouldn't see him again. He wrote back the next day, wanting to book another session that week. I agreed, and instantly felt butterflies in my stomach. I felt so unprofessional and so unsteady. There was a forum for sex workers, and I posted there, asking if any of the girls had ever felt that kind of attraction to their clients before. Some had, some hadn't, and all sorts of advice was offered to help me to work out what to do. Ultimately, I was asked the important question, could I afford to lose him as a client? I thought about it, my heart asking if I could afford to not take a chance. Was this a real-life Pretty Woman thing? I didn't want to be so cliche, but there was chemistry swirling. We had another session, and it was both incredibly sexy and absolutely hilarious. I tripped over my heels, and we giggled about it, an intimacy developing between us. 2 hours later, as we snuggled for some aftercare, I decided to go for it and asked him if he wanted to go to a fetish market with me, as he had commented on his lack of kinky clothes. He accepted, and we made plans. I, of course, immediately panicked and asked my girlfriend to come with me to keep me from making a mistake, and maybe let me know if I was being ridiculous and misreading him. Together, we browsed stalls filled with kinky toys and pinstripe clothes, trying things on and trying toys out. There was an ease to our interactions, a comfortable friendliness, and my girlfriend said to me that she thought he liked me back. So I did the suave thing before we parted ways and said teasingly, you know, if you let me do what I want, you wouldn't have to pay me anymore. He grinned. And so we began dating. We went to his first sex party, my girlfriend, my new boyfriend, and I, and proceeded to have fun dancing, making out, and watching the various goings-on. Early into the morning, we left the party exhausted, and he invited us to his flat to rest. He was in media, an exciting job that allowed him to live on his own in Soho, so we took him up on his offer and fell asleep all snuggled together. I thought I was in heaven, sandwiched between these two sexy people. I found myself thinking that this might be the beginning of something long-lasting. He was really kinky. I loved the challenge and all the things we did and tried. I made him nose hooks and mouth hooks, wrapped him in cling film and duct tape, spat in his mouth and pissed on him in the shower. We went to all these dark places together, him and me. But it was more than sex for me. We hung out and watched movies, went grocery shopping. I was in love with him and thought he loved me back, two perverts who had found each other, a crazy sex worker love story. I encouraged him to go to Burning Man to meet my friends and communities in the hope he would find acceptance. We'd go to pubs, sex shops, and bookstores, holding hands and talking about politics and psychology. I fell deeper in love, so thankful to meet someone who didn't mind my work, who I didn't have to explain it to, who seemingly accepted me. We went to kinky clubs, slow dancing to electronica, and kissing like we couldn't stop. There were hints that the fairy tale was unraveling, but I ignored them. The desire he had to be enhanced in some way when we did kink, for example, and I chalked that up to his shame around his desires and let it slide. He was embarrassed telling his friends about how we met, so I was always a writer to them, my sex worker self put in the closet if I met them at all. My friends knew and loved him. It didn't matter to them that he was originally a John, but he never seemed to notice that. Family was, of course, out of the question. It was hard, because I wondered if he was ashamed of me. when I was so proud of my job, happy to have met a great guy at work like any other girl. I felt frustrated sometimes, trapped into pretending to be someone I wasn't. But I loved him, and I respected him, so I kept quiet, even when friends of his said things about prostitution that made me uncomfortable. The truth is, we both realized that the sex work had created a rushed intimacy. We knew so much about each other's desires, but so little about what made the other tick. Our sex became kinkier and darker, our fantasies more dangerous and tense in an attempt to make up for the chasm between us. I felt less inclined to do other sex work, and spent my free time trying to understand what was going wrong, what I could do right. I was worried I was losing him, but I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I had heard so many times that sex workers couldn't be in relationships that I believed in. I flew to San Francisco for a visit. He took the chance to send me a Dear John email, which kind of special irony. We tried to be friends, meeting for coffee, but I was furious and hurt and not ready. Years later, I still hadn't recovered. I cut him out of my life for a while, and for the most part, I'm glad. I still worry on some days that as a sex worker, I'll only be the girlfriend experience and never the girlfriend. I've never gotten close to a client like that again, and I doubt I ever will. There is a part of me that's still traumatized and miserable about the whole thing. It was one of the hardest lessons in boundaries, trust, and honesty I've ever had. And yet, it was the Cinderella story brought to life. Pretty women in real time. When they talk about trauma and sex work, they tend to mean beaten and raped on the job, a daily reality for many sex workers real-wide. As an indoor sex worker with a lot of privilege and no arrests, I haven't experienced that kind of violence. I'm lucky in that way. While I live under the shadow of physical or sexual violence, more from the police than the clients, I really only experienced various forms of emotional abuse, usually from people who felt they had the right, because my choice to be an out prostitute was apparently consenting to constant public scrutiny. So I got off easy, really, when it comes to trauma and sex work, and I want to acknowledge that. And yet, even as a privileged sex worker, I do feel scarred. I think of how I tore my own relationship apart with my internalized whorephobia. I think of how the stigma of sex workers not being people can affect relationships and the people in them. I think of the way I've worried that I would have to choose between a job that gives me autonomy and agency or having a partner, something I no longer stress over, having experienced to the contrary. Writing this, I'm pretty sure I knew what the experience would be. Hookers can't afford to love. He was just using you for sex. You don't deserve a relationship anyway. If you don't like it, quit your job. And that's exactly the problem. People feel very entitled to mistreat sex workers like me every day, like we're not people with hopes, families, loves, and losses. On the other side, people feel like it's okay to say that clients are ugly old men who want to treat women badly, and that sex workers need protection from them. But clients are different across the board. Even now, I don't think he entered the relationship to hurt me. I don't think I went into things expecting to fall so hard either. Our relationship was not a political statement. It was just a girl loving a boy who didn't love her as much. The trauma had already been done before I ever met him by a society that told me I was worthless because of my job. And if I am one of the lucky ones, imagine the stigma, shaming, and cruelty rain down on those more marginalized than I am.